Hello and good day to you. My name is Nate. Haha, yes, and this is Limping Through Models with Nate. Why Nate? Because apparently there's a lot of Nathans that do videos like this. So to avoid any sort of confusion, I decided to go by Nate now. So there it is. Channel's updated. Everything's good. It's looking wonderful. This is the second part of the dream build, and that dream build is of this Wild Mouse Faller roller coaster. Oh yes, this week we're going to put some track on it. And maybe a little more. I don't know, you'll have to see. But with all that in mind, let's get started. This pile of plastic makes up all the track pieces of the Wild Mouse roller coaster. And before I de-sprue all these pieces, I'm going to go through and I'm going to take a Sharpie and mark all the pieces with the appropriate part number so that when I put these on later, I don't get confused as to which one's which. With all the pieces labeled, I start to de-sprue all the parts of the track. There's about probably 10 or so parts total. And once I do that, I take some masking tape and I roll it up into a tube-like shape and press that on the underside of each of the joints where I have the markings for the part pieces, and I put that on a sheet of styrofoam and spray that as carefully as possible. The first part of the track I decided to start with was the lift hill. So looking at the instructions, I gathered together all the pieces that comprise the lift hill, starting with the chain, which I will have to cut and splice together to get to the right size. In addition to some other pieces that eluded me for quite some time, specifically these spacers that go at the bottom of the lift hill. They're supposed to kind of hold the gear mechanism in place at the bottom part of the lift hill, in addition to a metal piece at the top of the lift hill that's supposed to that the chain's supposed to roll over. So, not knowing where any of that is, I decided to start work on the gear portion of it, which controls the lift hill chain and the direction it moves. This will be attached to the motor by a pulley once everything's in place. With this gear in place in the hole, it freely moves without that spacer in that spot. So I really need to figure out where in the world these spacers ended up. I checked all the bags once again in the boxes and out of the boxes, and it turns out this was in some random place on a desk on the other side of my office. So I find those spacers, I lay them out, and I take some super glue and I put them in the spot at the base of the lift hill and I fix that in place. With the spacer situation sorted, it's now time to move to the lift hill chain, which the instructions tell me needs to be 895 millimeters in length, or in centimeters, 89.5 centimeters. So using the centimeter measurements on my mat, I measure that out and I splice the chain together. And I drop that into the track of the lift hill. So I test out how the chain's going to look with both pieces put together, and there is a lot of slack in that chain that I think needs to go away. So I decided I was going to take about 10 centimeters worth of chain out of that just to remove that slack. And it turns out that was the wrong thing to do, because apparently when you put it back in, the chain is much shorter than it should be. So all that slack is needed for some reason, probably because, well, you know, the people who made these instructions knew what they were doing and measured it out to be what it really needs to be. So I decided to go by the instructions and put that chain back to the original length. And after I did that, I start to put the whole lift hill together. I clamp it down so it has some time to set. And once that's all clamped together, I do a little test of the mechanism, and that chain is moving right up that hill and is looking great. Now this is the fun part of the build, which I thought was the fun part at the very beginning, but it turned out to be kind of troublesome because there's a lot of caveats you need to be aware of when you're putting this model together. So you have the plates on the actual track itself, which have holes, and these holes line up with pegs that are in the frame. And you drop the hole into the peg on the frame and you glue that. Simple, right? However, there's other parts that you need to glue down as well that are not simple hole and peg gluing points. In a lot of cases, you have to glue the actual track to the frame itself without any official point to put it in. Now there may be like a bar that sticks out from the frame, and that's where you drop it in, but the way it lays out, there may not be a sufficient piece of track that you can actually affix to the frame. So you have to do some tricky finagling here and there, and it took a lot of patience and a lot of time. And in some of the instances, I had to take a spare piece of the frame material, kind of like a little square or something, and use that as a buffer between the track and the frame, so that, you know, everything has something to glue together to. There was really only one place that I really needed that buffer. Most other places I was able to keep together with a clamp and some patience and time to let those pieces join together. Aside from that, I was really thankful that I marked all the pieces beforehand, because there were some pieces that were very similar in size and length that would have been in the wrong place had I not done that. And once I had some experience under my belt, the rest of the track came together pretty nicely. There were additional frame pieces that I needed to put onto the model, so I had to find those, paint those up, and then glue them in. Just a simple support for the lift hill, and also another support for the sign that's eventually going to go up. The next part of this is to create the housing for the motor. Now, there's supposed to be some stickers that go on it, but seeing how this is a 20-year-old model, the stickers don't stick anymore. So after doing some cleaning of the edges of the motor housing, I get a glue stick and I use that to stick the stickers onto the side of the motor housing, and that worked out pretty well. Once I drop that motor housing in place on the frame, I can now attach the lift hill to the track, which apparently you're not supposed to use glue to attach, but I learned that lesson a little later. Let me just get that out there right now, that I did mess that up initially. To attach the lift hill to the base, there's these two pegs that go in at the bottom, and there's some hooks on the underside of the lift hill that affix to the top of the lift hill, so everything is in place on the frame. I had some trouble putting the belt in because there were some pieces of the base that decided to detach themselves from the base, like the L bracket that held the motor in place, and also the part of the base that holds the bottom of the lift hill in place. And so once I got all that back in place, I was able to get the belt around the bottom of the lift hill and around the motor, and the tensioner in place to where everything should work wonderful when it has power. It goes in and out and in and out and in and... Wait a minute. I have a complete track. Oh, no. This video ain't over. I'm putting a car on this. Let's go to it. Oh, Nathan, you were so innocent, so impressionable, thinking you would have such a great time making these cars, skipping to the end of the instructions to do so, getting those cars on the track. But little did you know that this was going to be a pain in your hind parts, because there are so many small pieces that go into this car here. Now, the first place I screwed up was on the front axle. This is comprised of the axle itself, a screw, and a bolt. The bolt glues into the front axle piece. You lay that on the underside of the car, and then you take the screw, put that through a hole at the top, and hopefully screw that into place where the bolt is. What I ended up doing on my first attempt was stripping the screw and the nut. So I effectively ruined one car, so now I'm down to 3 cars. So in order to avoid this from happening again, I decided to put the screw through the hole, and then on the underside, without the axle in place, put the nut in the screw, so I know that both pieces are together and they're not stripped. And then I glue the axle to the nut on the underside of the car. And I did this for the other 3 cars, and I had no problem putting any of this together. I was able to confirm that nothing was stripped and everything could freely move. The next part of this is the side wheels, which are comprised of a metal pin, a plastic wheel, and the combination of the two going into these holes on the underside of the car in 4 places. So there's 4 spots for these wheels. The purpose of these wheels is to allow the cars to move side to side on the track, and not fall off the track. There's actually a curvature to these wheels that are supposed to keep it on the track when it takes those tight turns. When those wheels are in place, I add some springs that attach to the stationary parts of the axle and are used to snap the front axle back in place whenever it makes those turns. The last portion of the wheels are these cylinders that go across the underside of the car and are used to allow the car to roll freely over the top of the track. And there's some spacers that you have to put in place to make sure that these wheels stay in place, and if you do it right, they should freely move for quite some time without any sort of friction against the wheel. And that's what the underside of the car looks like with all the wheels in place. The next step in the car assembly is adding the sidewalls to the car itself. Now these are the plastic pieces that come in the kit. They look really cool because they have like this glitter sort of stuff molded into it. So they make for some really shiny car pieces. And I use some super glue to attach those to the metal frame. And then I attach the seats to the car as well. One thing you need to make sure of when you're attaching the front car seat is that you don't go too heavy on the super glue. Why? Because it's under that front seat is where the screw for the front axle sits. And if you put too much super glue there, that super glue is going to seep into the hole where that screw sits, and it's going to cause that front axle to not move at all. I had that happen one time on one of the cars, and I was able to salvage that. I had to do an extensive cleaning job to get that working, and after that was done, I was able to get the car freely moving on the track, thankfully. And it was almost a casualty, but thankfully it did not affect the car, and I thankfully have 3 cars still that I can run on the track. I tried to use some Plastruct to get some of the sidebars of the car in place, but that just wasn't working out. So I had to go and use some super glue, and that worked out much better than the Plastruct could. And I'm just adding some additional detail parts to the car. I mean, there's not really much I can say here. I mean, it's all just coming together, and you'll see what it looks like at the end, so sit tight. And here's the end. There's the car. Lap bars, sidebars, and everything. Looking good. Now it's time to test this baby out. One thing I didn't show in the car build is that there is also a magnet that gets attached to the underside of the car, and that's used to attach the car to the lift hill chain as it goes up. And once that car gets to the end of the lift hill, the chain will break itself away from that magnet, allowing the car to flow down the track. So I am limping this car up the hill as slowly as I can, and now we're at the apex and going down. This is the very first run of the car to see where it goes, and that's where it goes. It finds a valley to just kind of sit itself in. And a second stop. Do I hear a third stop? Yes, there's a third stop there too. A fourth stop. Wow. This one is bad. 5 stops. Could not make a complete run. So what needs to be done? Well, there's a couple things that I decided to do, especially at the top with the switchbacks. The way that the track lays at the switchbacks, it was curving up and then over and then down into the switchback. I felt like I needed to make that level. And so what I did was I took some of the supports that were supporting the edge of the switchback, and I either swapped them with other supports or I moved them up to allow the switchback to be level at that point. This did help a little bit to give the car some more momentum at the switchback level as it's going down the track, so that there's a lot more speed as it goes into the very first large turn down into the belly of the track, and then I noticed that there were some other parts at the joins that the car kind of hobbled over. You could hear that audible click as it was going through the joins, so I decided to fix some of those areas as well, to make those as smooth as possible, to make a nice smooth transaction so that the car doesn't have another point to where it could slow down. And additionally, on the other side, there were some more of the switchbacks that I had to swap around to make that a little more level to support the overall speed of the car itself. And here's one more run of the car. Let's see how far it goes. Goes through those switchbacks pretty well. Goes through there. Oh, one stop. 2 stops. 3 stops. Almost makes it to the end. We'll see what else I can do to fix this. Whee! Yeah. Kinda one. That is 2. Do I get a 3? I get a 3. Yes, indeed. Wonderful. So now I have 3 cars. I should have 4, but you know I screwed up that first one. So now I have 3 cars to play with. I don't have a working lift hill just yet, but I'm pretty sure this will go fast. And so it'll be a really fast start off of the lift hill for these cars. And also I had to put in a lot of effort to get these cars to actually roll on this track. Specifically, I did the one thing the instructions tell you not to do, and I kind of oiled all the pieces so that they just down the track. The red one didn't need it as much, but the blue ones really did. But aside from that, I'm really liking that I can have an actual complete track with cars running on it, and really the only thing left to do is the details. So I think that's going to be the next video. The next video, we're going to take care of all the details, build the station, the fencing around it, maybe do a couple other tweaks here and there, get the sign up here. It's going to be really good. So like, comment, subscribe, do all that you have to do to get back here for the next video where you can see probably the completion of the Wild Mouse roller coaster. Until then, I'll see you next time. One for the road.